All right, we'll get going. So I'm Emily Gore. I'm the Deputy University Librarian at the University of Georgia. And I've been working on the rightstatements.org project for, I don't know, the better part of my life, it feels like. I think Melissa and I were talking about that it's been almost 10 years since we've kind of started this project and have been working on it. I'll let Melissa introduce herself.
I'm Melissa. Is this on?
Yeah.
I'm Melissa Levine. I'm the director of the Copyright Office at the University of Michigan Library, but I have worked at the Smithsonian and the Library of Congress and the Wolfsonian Museum at Florida International University. And this project solves problems at all of them, which is why I am here.
Awesome. And Maarten is joining us from the Netherlands. I'm going to let Maarten introduce himself as well.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon here in the Netherlands. I'm a copyright advocate in the Netherlands. I've been involved in the rights statement since the beginning and even its precursors at Europeana. So this has also already been part of my entire career, I think. Since the first meeting of my career was about this type of work.
Thanks, Maarten. So just to begin, how many of you are rights statements users or aware of rightstatements.org? So I figured most people in the room would be aware. So I'm going to go quickly through a set of slides that gets everybody on the same page about what rightstatements.org is and kind of where we are. And then we're just going to have a conversation that engages Maarten as well. So rightstatements.org was founded by DPLA and Europeana in 2015. We had a meeting at the New York Public Library and we hashed through a lot of things and kind of the project was born. There are 12 standardized right statements that describe copyright status and other contractual and legal conditions. And the purpose of creating them in the first place was to communicate reuse possibilities for online cultural heritage objects. Intended to kind of standardize those statements at use in aggregators and obviously also by the partners of the aggregators as well as individual institutions. We certainly see a lot of individual institution use that aren't a part of aggregators. We were the recipient of the Night News Challenge Award. I believe that was 2016, but somewhere around there. So before rights statements existed, Europeana had a licensing framework, and they used that in conjunction with CC licenses and tools. In the US, we had a ton of free text statements that were not actionable at all. Sometimes they were like ginormous paragraphs. So we had really no way to have actionable rights at all until we created rightstatements.org. And there was no way to express jurisdictional, public domain, or copyright. This is still problematic. We did create a statement that is no copyright US, but other than that, it's very difficult to express jurisdictional domain outside of the US. So I think what's super interesting is I don't think when we started with this work, we knew how impactful rightstatements.org would be and what the reach would actually be. But the reach is pretty astounding. The right statements have been translated into 12 languages, and I believe there are 5 additional that are ready to go. That just haven't gone yet because we're getting to the point where the governance is not working. And so we need to move the five languages forward. That's one of the things, 5 translations forward. The statements themselves are in use by over 4,000 Europeana partner institutions. I believe that is over 20 million objects in Europeana that have right statements. Very similar on the U.S. side, there are 33 hubs in the Digital Public Library of America that represent many thousands partners as well. And they're in use by many individual institutions as well as archive.org. So we see that a lot on our, when we look at web stats, where things are coming from. Actively used by libraries, museums, cultural heritage agencies of all types to convey rights status. So this is a quick map of our stats and our reach. You can see the reach is worldwide. This is actually from 2019 through 2023, and we'll talk about why only 2023 in a minute, but you can, I'm going to look at an active view of that. You can see this, and this represents just people who have actually clicked on the statement. So if you are a user of the right statements, you know that you often are just displaying it in your, whatever your system is, you're displaying it. But if an actual user clicks on the statement to see the full statement, that's what's represented here. So these are only people who have clicked. So the uses obviously are much larger, but you can see that the impact is worldwide. Lots of uses in the United States, Germany, Spain, and then others worldwide, we're seeing use of the right statements. Mm-hmm. So the governance, getting to that point. So prior to 2020, we had a governance group that included Europeana, DPLA, and other national aggregators, including the National Library of India, the Trove project out of Australia, which many of you might be familiar with, and the National Library of Canada, as well as the National Library of New Zealand. Those folks came together to form that overall governance structure. And there was a goal that everyone pay $10,000 a year to kind of keep that going. I'm not sure that any one year that all of the people paid, but anyway, there was a goal to make that happen. At the time, before the pandemic, Europeana provided a part-time staffer to support the project and kind of do that coordination and have the governance groups work. So we had a statements working group and a technical working group that had international representation, that we could make changes to the statements. And then if we needed to make changes to the technical infrastructure, they all went through those two committees. The National Library of Luxembourg, they from the beginning have provided the technical infrastructure. So they ran the server, they made everything work on the back end. That server basically was kind of past end of life recently, and it got turned off. So now it is at Europeana. The Right Statements.org is being hosted at Europeana, at least for the time being. So where we are with the current governance status, the governance pretty much fell apart during the pandemic. I don't feel like this is a song that only we are singing. I feel like this is happening in this happened in a number of our communities. There's been a lot of staffing turnover in various positions on this project. Melissa and I sat with Dave Hansen yesterday going over the original MOU that we drafted around that table in 2015 at New York Public Library, and the people called out for action in the project. I think there was one person still in their role. So of like the 10 people who were mentioned. So the current model is not inclusive of the breadth of users. And right now we're just kind of in maintenance mode with the website up and running. We have a newly formed interim steering committee to try to move this whole thing forward, to try to get governance re-engaged. And the names of those folks are on the screen. 3 of us are with you here today. So Maarten, myself, and Melissa, and then there are a couple of folks also not here, but names you'll probably recognize, who we're trying to move the governance forward. Europeana remains committed to using the statements, as I think many of you are committed to using the statements, but they are at this time no longer overseeing that international governance operation, and they have also identified needs for a new statement in Europe based on a new law that has emerged, and so they have a need for a new statement to be developed. There is a U.S. working group largely associated with DPLA hub members, and that remains very active. As a matter of fact, I spoke with those folks last week, and they have also identified needs for new statements and would like to see some work move forward, but have not had the channel to do so on the international level. So as a steering committee, we've been meeting recently the past probably, 4 or 5 months, Melissa, to discuss kind of how to move things forward, to discuss potential governance models, to identify potential funders or funding, what the funding needs are, and kind of identifying those known community needs, like I mentioned, those statements already, and potentially identifying aligned organizations and articulating and posting requirements of what we would like to see in an organizational home to move this forward. So we're going to hold a couple of informational sessions. This CNI is the first time we're kind of publicly talking about this, but we're going to hold a couple of information sessions in the first quarter of 2025 for those interested just in learning more. We'll have that information up on the rightstatements.org website. And then we will also be issuing an RFP for a new organizational home for Right Statements. And all of that information will be up on rightstatements.org, and we'll try to push it out in other channels as well, so it's widespread. I'd love to just move to the kind of talk about a little bit about the conversation of why right statements is important to folks, and what people would like to see, and what are the needs are. What do you in a new governance structure, and how would you like to see the community represented? Maarten, I'm going to start with you. If you can chat a little bit about right statements important in your work, and what you would like to see in an organizational home.
Yeah, thank you. So in Europe, we have over 4,000 heritage institutions that are pushing their collections to Europeana, and they all have to use right statements. For us, it's very important that right statements continues to be available, but also in need of new governance, especially because we also need new statements as said, with new European directives, come new possibilities to show what can be done with heritage materials. So it's both necessary to have a good governance structure to be able to guide those things and also guide new translations. But we also need a technical update of the project. Since Europeana has taken over some of the technical management, they've seen some abuse of the platform. They've also seen some possible improvements already. There are still some improvements scheduled or not scheduled, but identified from previous years where we've seen that development has tapered down. These also need to be picked up to make right statements ready for the next 10 years, hopefully the next 20 years. That's the answer to these first 3 ones. Back to you.
Thanks, Maarten. I wonder if, Melissa, you might talk about right statements' importance to you.
I think that you've covered a lot of the substantive and practical things. For me, I've been working in this field for going on 30 years, and there's a pattern in our community to see a problem, solve a problem, and then not sustain the thing that's solved the problem. And this is one of these things that's actually pretty straightforward, and it's one of the rare things in my work where the copyright and legal piece is easier than the governance piece. And it works, and there's been uptake, and it's at a personal level, it feels like an utter waste and a tremendous potential and possibility to strike a problem off our list to a certain degree by sustaining this. So while this was driven a bit off kilter by among many things during the pandemic, this seems like one of the simpler things to get back on track, and this is our first effort to open up this conversation. Maarten and I reconnected it's actually maybe 2 years, talking about this issue and then the need to recenter it. So I've also had the opportunity to be involved with the CNI community for as long as it's existed. And one of the great things is the way in which it is a place for conversation. And I have many opportunities to ask tech people questions that they think are stupid, but then they come back and say they're not. And as a humanist, I have something to share. So this project embodies a lot of those best possibilities. And I think it is relevant, certainly for a lot of the conversations about data and AI, and facilitates a lot of the themes that are coming up in this meeting.
Great, thank you. So I would love to open up the floor for audience questions, or for even you to comment on the questions I have asked here on the screen. Why is this important? What do you want to see in governance? Yeah.
The need for a European-specific statement based on a new law. You referenced that a couple of times. Can you just say a little bit more about what you're talking about?
I'm going to let Maarten take that one.
That's the copyright directive, the Digital Single Market Directive from 2021, which allows heritage institutions to publish works on the internet if they're no longer used in commerce after registration at the European Union's Intellectual Property Office and a wait period of 6 months. So a reference or a statement that refers to that out of commerce possibility would be very useful to communicate that we are able to publish heritage, but under strict restrictions for further reuse of the material. Can I answer the question?
Yeah.
Because I can't see the okay, good.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Catherine's putting her thumb up in the air. Others with questions about right statements or conversation you'd like to have about governance. I can talk forever, but I want to let y'all talk.
This might be anticipating the call for a host down the road in 2025, but how much does it cost to run rightstatements.org a year? Is that something you're able to quantify in dollars and hours at this point?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So yeah, it's been run on a really lean budget so far. But I think it's required the participation of key members of the community, right? And so I think that that the community itself is more of the requirement on the community versus hiring and that participation. So I think in my mind, I think about facilitation that is needed. So someone to at least fill a role of convener, facilitator, bringing people together. Because I think without that, that's where things kind of fell apart without having that. So obviously we know what it costs to kind of run a server and those kinds of things, but without that part-time help, that focused on the convening, that's really where I think things really kind of fell apart. Dave, and then I'll go here.
So you mentioned that, the National Library of India was involved and the Australians. I think there was some New Zealand involvement at some point. And the conversation here is very American and European. Have you had any contact with those other partners? Have you heard about interest or lack thereof?
So I think many of those folks, so here's my understanding, and Maarten, if you know any more as well, please add, and you, Melissa, as well. So I believe that in particular, the Trove folks really needed more of the local context kinds of statements integrated, and they chose to move more down that path. And I think the same on the New Zealand side. My recollection is the National Library of India never really got off the ground, never really implemented the statements at any. They had intention to do so, but never really implemented the statements at any scale. And I believe that is the same for Canada. But I could be wrong. Do other folks know that those folks had kind of have definitely kind of removed themselves from governance, maybe even before the pandemic.
I think there's also been some the change of people in different roles.
Yes,
and my my own sense is that we sort of have been organically trying to get this core group coordinated. It's not an issue of exclusion. It's an issue of like kind of having a cohesive conversation and then including others really organically as they as we let them know, as they express interest. But I think we're not quite there to like more formally reach out.
Yeah.
Because it's not the same people either. I'm sorry, Maarten.
And very practically, we've sent out a communication to everyone who was involved in the governance, the aggregators, and the ones that have responded have formed this interim committee. So the mention of national libraries haven't responded, or national institution haven't responded, it's because it just didn't haven't responded to our inquiries, and it's no exclusion or design even. It's just a coalition of the willing.
I will say that the original project used Basecamp, and that Basecamp is still in place, so it's made it actually a lot easier to try and reconnect. But like, for example, Dave was involved with this project and Emily, and both are in different roles. And so it was by word of mouth that I knew, and I could get somebody to put their correct emails in and come.
Yeah. So Kate at Maryland is my whole name. And I have a couple of like thoughts and questions that go along with this. So at the University of Maryland, we rely heavily on rightstatements.org. I suspect the way that most in this room do, which is for our digital collections objects. And it has been an exceptional, if underappreciated piece of our infrastructure, because I think that our rights statements and the old era of rights statements was one of the most user hostile ways that we could possibly present information, right? And it has been a huge part of our workflows, and I would be disappointed to see it go away. My secondary question to you when it comes to the governance structures, I'm wondering to what extent you've engaged with some of the open source ecosystems and repository systems, or with that environment as like either opportunities for participation in governance, since that's one of the primary use cases, like at a technical level, but that might also be an opportunity to build more community around like particularly some of the technical aspects and continued sustainability of the project. Yeah, it's a great idea. I mean, I think early on we had some conversations about that, and I think we had some successes of getting the right statements into some systems so that they're pull down, drop down, those kinds of things, which I think is very helpful. But I think your idea about potentially engaging with them maybe as a next level effort, I guess I'll just try to be real frank, as those of you in the audience who know me, I typically am. It's taking a lot for us just to kind of get a coalition of the willing to try to move this forward. And so that's really kind of where we are, is like, okay, folks, we can't let this die, and we've got to figure out how to move it forward. But I appreciate your ideas of how we reach out next level, kind of now that we're together and we're trying to agree on what those characteristics look like of, an organizational home, and then being able to kind of, I think, make those partnerships. So definitely appreciate the suggestion. And if you have particular ones, I'd be happy to hear them as well.
Sure do.
Yeah. Any other questions or community suggestions for right statements? Would all of you feel sad if it went away? Yes. All right. Good.
Everybody nods their head. Okay.
We're gonna do our best to not let right statements go away. I think Melissa threatened Dan Cohen that he would have to run it out of his house. So when I saw him last night at the reception, he said,
I was listening.
He wasn't. He said, I hear I might have to run right statements out of my house. So, if worse comes to worse, we're going to Dan's house.
He helped start it. So
He did help start it. So anyway, just trying to find a good home. Yeah, please.
So, it seems like you're in this very much state of flux. And we had a question about how much it costs to run. But I guess a different question is, you need to do some revamping of the governance structure, and there's some work that has to be done. If you were to show up in front of, say, a foundation or a funder, what would the ask be to kind of fix what's going on?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, I think we're trying to figure that out, Dave. And we welcome you to rejoin the steering committee if you would like. But I think that's what we're trying to figure out, and to potentially give any new organizational home the leeway to work to influence that. So I think we don't want to be extremely prescriptive of what, like, you must do X, Y, and Z, and you must use these funds that we've procured in this way. So I'd like to see us work in partnership with a potential organizational home and a funder together to kind of think through what that structure might look like, and then identify what the funding needs would be. So that's why I think we're going to hold these calls, these requests for information calls, so that people can come, we can have more conversations and try to develop and begin to have some conversations with funders, at least to seed the idea of what I'll call bridge funding, to potentially get us to be able to establish a new model that could move us forward. But I think that is really kind of where we are. I don't know if y'all want to add more to that.
I think, the cost, because it really will come down to numbers, is it sort of depends on who's interested and who's able. So like the cost for a larger organization who's already got infrastructure in place for this is a small piece of overhead. Yes, you need money, but you don't have to like create whole new systems. This is like a small piece in a larger environment. You do need somebody who can be that spoken wheel, the middle of that situation. And the rest of it depends on what you or we want and what we can afford. So it can be like the simplest thing, or it can be a super engaged, lots of conversation, lots of meetings. And we did pretty well with very minimal at the front end. It doesn't mean it has to stay that way. But my own feeling is I'm not feeling like super ambitious at the what I really want to sustain this. And I don't think it's not a big budget thing, but it's one that none of us can just write the check, and none of us have necessarily the leeway in our own institutions to say, oh yes, we should be the one taking it on. And also because it is a very community driven kind of thing, it's even if one has the capacity to do that, there has to be a we. And so we've also candidly, as being US centric, have been very sensitive to the importance of making sure that this is a globally welcoming, and have not presumed that it would necessarily be an American institution. And it's one of the reasons it's taken a long time to get to the point of more public conversation, because we just haven't, we needed to open up the conversation even to make that a possibility. So is that a fair?
I think that's fair. Maarten, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you said it all. Sorry.
Nathan?
Most of the participants so far are in the access and aggregator community, but we know we do digital preservation for the purposes of access. That's the whole reason we're in the endeavor. And so I'm assuming when you start to issue your call for a host, you might have a short list of organizations you might reach out and say, hey, would you like to talk about this? I just want to encourage you to think about the digital preservation communities, who I think also have a very large stake in the outcome of the whole rights statements endeavor, and how we can clearly communicate the reusability of these objects that we're preserving. So as you're thinking, it tends to be access, but I think the preservation community might be interested as well.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. All right, I think we are at time. I really appreciate y'all spending time with us this morning and thinking about right statements. So thank you so much.
Thank you.